I am extremely happy to introduce Ben Werdmuller, our keynote speaker today. As many of you know, he's been a key member of our community for many, many years, since long before FediForum started. He's built open source social networking platforms for social movements, to train aid workers, for governments, big companies, individuals, communities, and Ivy League universities. He is currently the Senior Director of Technology at ProPublica, which, if you don't know, is probably the most important investigative journalism organization in North America today. He also writes a blog, and as I have learned over the years, it's always worth listening to Ben. So Ben, we are very glad to have you. The stage is all yours.
And I am so excited to be here. All right. Well, hello. It's a real pleasure to be with you all today. You are building the future, and I want to spend a little time to tell you about why I think the work you're doing really matters. I am going to be a little bit opinionated in this talk, so I want to make clear this presentation represents me and me alone. It does not represent my employer. It doesn't represent FediForum. It doesn't represent the other organizations that I'm involved with. These are my words, and I want to progress in the spirit that Johannes just laid out for the event. So thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'm Ben Werdmuller. I'm based just outside of Philadelphia. I lead technology for ProPublica, which, as Johanna said, is a nonprofit newsroom here in the US that investigates abuses of power and betrayals of the public trust by government, business, and other institutions. So if you remember the Clarence Thomas corruption scandal, Project 2025 co-author Russell Vought's private remarks about how he was going to go after the left, or Peter Thiel's tax-free investment scheme, that was our reporting. I'm not a journalist, but I'm really, really proud to support the people doing this journalistic work. But I actually started my career by building open source social networking platforms. I built a platform that allowed communities to self-host on their terms, using exactly the features that would support their needs. Elk started in higher education, but it was used by NGOs like Greenpeace and Oxfam to train aid workers. It was used by the anti-austerity movement in Spain to help them organize, and Fortune 500 companies and at least one government used it as their primary intranet. And we always wanted Elk to federate. That was the plan from literally day one in 2003. It was an obvious need. There was no ActivityPub yet, though. We kind of picked up on whatever tech we could. OpenID, friend of a friend, but we ended up trying to cobble our own standard together. And it wasn't ActivityPub. It didn't work out quite as we'd hoped, but it began to touch on some of those underlying ideas. And I built Known as a way for anyone to build feeds containing content of any type. It was mostly used by indie web bloggers, and it supported indie web standards for decentralized conversations, but it could support any number of users, and a feed could be published to, by webhook, micropub, etc., meaning theoretically any automatic system could post there. I invested in mission-driven startups. These were all ventures that actually had diverse teams and missions that weren't a million miles away from the missions of people in this room. And then I took a really hard left turn and moved into leading technology for newsrooms because I felt that was the best way to be useful in this era. The 19th reports at the intersection of gender, politics, and policy, which is a much-needed inclusive newsroom in a world where a lot of our news is produced by white men in New York City. And, you've already been introduced to ProPublica. So I've been involved in building platforms, supporting people who are building platforms, and leading technology in the kinds of organizations that we hope will be platform users. I've been on all sides of the table. And now, maybe ironically, while I'm not actively building or directly supporting platforms, open social networking is finally taking off. My timing is terrible, but I'm really, really thrilled to be back in this conversation. So I'd love to open FediForum with this provocation. Why does any of this matter? Why should anyone care about decentralized or federated networks? So let's start by examining the moment we're in the world. So here in the US, our government is becoming increasingly authoritarian. Immigrants are being ripped off the streets by masked officers without due process, often shipped to places like El Salvador or South Sudan. Just last week, Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, told a roomful of American generals that he wanted to fight, quote unquote, the enemy within in the United States, echoing a phrase that was used in Nazi Germany. And in Gaza, it's a really it's a really sad day today. It's ongoing. A UN commission found that there is indeed an ongoing genocide in progress. Many tens of thousands of people have been killed. Some of them were allegedly identified by a targeting AI through metadata from their WhatsApp chats. And here in the US, students and journalists who have described it as a genocide have been detained or deported. Even liking a post on Instagram has been considered an actionable signal that you support terrorism by aligning yourself with Hamas. And on some US-run social networks, people from Palestine who have been asking for help have been systematically removed. Here, national security policy now describes the following amongst signals that you might be a terrorist: anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, anti-Christianity, support for the overthrow of the United States government, extremism on migration, race, and gender, and hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on family, religion, and morality. People from communities that were already vulnerable, trans people among them, have been explicitly targeted, again, just as they were through history in dark times like 1930s Germany. And speaking of trans people, they're reportedly about to be classified as a nihilistic, violent, extremist threat group. Categorizing all of these communities this way is a pretext to surveillance. The Cloud Act, passed in 2018, compels US-based online services, including US subsidiaries of foreign organizations, to share data with the US government, regardless of where in the world that data is stored and regardless of local regulations like GDPR. In the event of a criminal subpoena, including for suspected terrorist activity, which, as you know, has a very wide definition now, you may never know your data was supplied. And that was always creepy, right? But in a world where you may be profiled as a potential terrorist for having left-of-center opinions or for being a member of a vulnerable group like the trans community, that really, really matters. So the first step towards doing something about these events and threats to democracy is to know about them. How do we learn about them? And in most Western countries, social media and video networks are now our main source of news and the way we receive updates from our friends. A handful of companies own how we learn about the world, giving them the ability to shape our collective worldviews, influence movements, and prioritize their own interests. And to be honest, they've never been great actors, right? Amnesty International accused Meta of platforming a genocide in Myanmar in 2017, but their influence and power has never been greater than it is today. And every major commercial social network is complicit. They are collaborators. So we all know about this guy, Twitter acquirer Elon Musk, who bent the platform to fit his political worldview, but he is not alone. Here's Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, owner of LinkedIn, who contributed $1 million to Trump's inauguration fund. Here's Mark Zuckerberg, who owns Threads, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, who said that he feels optimistic about the new administration's agenda. And here's Larry Ellison, who will control TikTok in the US, who was a major investor in Trump, and who one advisor called, in a Wired interview, the shadow president of the United States. Social media is very quickly becoming aligned with a state that in itself is becoming increasingly authoritarian. And another way we have traditionally learned about the world is journalism in the media. A free press is usually a check on power. Multiple studies have found that communities with an active newsroom have less political corruption, or rather, more accurately, that communities without an active newsroom have more corruption. But the news industry has failed to adapt to the more personal nature of the web and has been in slow decline for many, many years. And compounding this, business decisions by companies like Google have led to fewer click-throughs to news sites from search engines as well as from traditional social networks. They display AI summaries and show you answer boxes instead of prominently linking to the sources themselves. And fewer people clicking through translates to fewer page views, fewer subscribers, and fewer donors. Engagement and revenue are both declining, and public service journalism is withering just when we need it most. And now, public media has been defunded by the government, driving the final nail into the coffin for many of these outlets. Hundreds of them have closed or are predicted to close soon. So between the capitulation of social media and the slow decay of journalism, the result is less sunlight, more corruption, and more freedom for authoritarianism to spread and thrive. So Obviously, I'm speaking from the US context, but these aren't US-only problems. For one thing, America's influence extends worldwide, both through agreements and through overarching legislation like the Cloud Act, which we just heard about. But for another, there are parallel movements elsewhere. Over in Britain, a nationalist movement that started with Brexit is really taking hold, while public journalistic institutions like the BBC are under threat. The Online Safety Act over there requires identity verification that can put people in vulnerable communities at risk, and the government seemingly continually asks for backdoors and privacy software. Similar patterns, are emerging over much of Europe, and Japan just elected a far-right prime minister. The problem is global. So there is a lot going on everywhere. That was a real sort of bummer of an act. It can be overwhelming, right? But whether you like it or not, sitting in this virtual room, you are the counterculture. All of you are building platforms, communities, and relationships with the potential to create an alternative to this centralization of power and influence. So we talk a lot about social media these days, but I want to register two definitions with you for a moment. Social media is the town square. We've heard a lot about the town square, right, online for the last few years. A global commons where we can all learn from each other and build audiences at scale. Social networking, on the other hand, is a way to support communities of any kind using technology. These two things can interact and intersect, but they are not the same. For what it's worth, because of its emphasis on scale, I think social media is more predisposed to centralization. And because of its emphasis on relationships and communities, social networking is more predisposed to decentralization. So let's try and make this a little bit more concrete. Imagine I'm part of a rapid response network protecting immigrants from deportation without due process, right? Speaking to the problems that I was setting up earlier. I have a core community. We trust each other completely. We coordinate the sensitive stuff in our private space, right? Who has access to various resources, which volunteers are trained legal observers, how we move money to families when someone gets detained. This inner circle needs to be absolutely secure. These conversations could get people deported or worse if they fall into the wrong hands. But our community can't cover a whole city, let alone a country, so we connect with other groups we trust. Other mutual aid networks, immigrant rights organizations, faith communities that have offered sanctuary. These groups have their own secure spaces, their own trusted circles, but we need to coordinate with them. When ICE shows up to detain someone, we might need bodies there within 20 minutes, witnesses with cameras, legal observers, community members who can slow the process down and ensure that due process is followed. So we're building an archipelago of trusted communities, each with their own secure space, but able to communicate across those boundaries. And together, across this archipelago, we can have private end-to-end encrypted conversations about who's available for rapid response, where ICE was spotted this morning, which families need emergency funds. And this encryption is vital. Without it, the web hosts that power our communities can be subpoenaed without our knowledge, and our conversations could be handed over to the government, putting everyone we're trying to help at risk. So at this level, everything must be encrypted. The inner circles and the archipelago both need to be surveillance-proof. And here, federation makes us stronger. If one community is compromised for any reason and is taken offline, the others remain online, just like the web itself. And then when we're ready, we step into the public Fediverse. We announce the action, we share the video, we name the officials responsible, we rally public support. Everyone has access to this. It's the town square, the place where we build power at scale. But we only got here safely because we could organize privately first. And so that's the distinction. Networking builds trust and enables coordination within and across communities. Media scales that message to everyone. And the Fediverse can do both. And it can do it without centralization, without being subject to any one company's business decisions. And if we add encryption with freedom from surveillance. For vulnerable groups in particular, that provides a refuge, a place to build relationships and community, and perhaps most crucially, a place to organize. But these two modes, social media and social networking, are different modes with different use cases and different technical requirements. So in my example, Each group hosts its own communications and controls its own data. They federate to form an archipelago with other trusted groups. At both of these levels, communications are end-to-end encrypted because they have to be. These conversations can't happen safely without it being physically impossible for adverse actors, including the government, to obtain access to them without the active participation of the community itself. The Fediverse is not inherently safer because it's federated. An open permissionless protocol can be exploited just as easily to surveil as it can to build. But then at the public level, those same groups can broadcast to the open Fediverse when they need to. So a lot of work has been done, right? There's a spec for MLS over ActivityPub, which covers a lot of these activities, and using encryption within a limited archipelago limits potential exposure of metadata to a set of trusted communities. And it's absolutely true that most Fediverse platforms don't currently support this archipelago model, right? MLS over ActivityPub is very much still in development. And a lot of platforms don't have this idea of concentric circles of trust. But the building blocks do exist. The work is being done by you in your communities. So obviously, this isn't limited to immigration protests or even activism. This model of small trusted communities that intersect with the public sphere is already at the heart of the open social web. With the right tooling, it has applicability for journalism, for mutual aid, for cooperative culture, for collaborative marketplaces, and for every aspect of public life. The open social web is, I believe, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, the future of social and the future of the web, right? So you might reasonably disagree with me about the threats I set up, the needs of this particular kind of activism, and this particular manifestation of a solution. But my point is not necessarily to advocate for this particular model. It's more that when we're building something new, we need to start somewhere small and specific. We need to start by supporting a specific community's burning needs really well and grow outwards from there. Everything big started small. Let's talk about TextMob. TextMob was an SMS messaging service originally built by the Institute for Applied Autonomy for protesting political conventions back in 2004, towards the beginning of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Activists used it to coordinate actions, report on police movements, and share their whereabouts. A user would send the status update via SMS, and other members of the group would receive it. They refined it based on this very specific use case. So after the Republican National Convention that year, there was a weekend session of hackers and activists, and two of the people at that session, Rabble and Blaine Cook, worked for a company called Odeo that was building a social networking for podcasting and was still kind of playing around, trying to get it off the ground. Rabble and Blaine made some helpful suggestions that improved TextMob and similar tools, but then they also took it back to Odeo and did an internal presentation about the tool and how it worked. And then a few days later, literally a few days later, at an internal hack day, the team at Odeo prototyped a tool that worked really similarly. And eventually they named it Twitter. All of our microblogging tools have this lineage. Short messages designed for a specific group of people and limited in length for a specific reason that was an outcome of that use case. A specific use case led to a working prototype that led to a wider application. And that pattern is repeated again and again. Everything big started small. So for the open social web to thrive, we need to go back to real communities with real world use cases and solve their problems better than anything else. Not the needs necessarily of individuals within them, but of the interconnected communities themselves. We need to build social networks that deeply support their needs, and then social media that helps them thrive. So if microblogging emerged from SMS updates for activists coordinating at the RNC in 2004, what should emerge from the needs of communities in 2025? What does that look like in practice? So I'll challenge anyone looking to start a new platform or add features to an existing one to ask 3 questions. First, who specifically do we want to help? Certainly not everybody, right? And not activists or journalists in the abstract. Which organizers, which newsrooms, which communities, which very specific communities? Have you sat with them? Have you marched with them? Have you watched them work? Have you understood how they communicate and where their current tools fail them in their lives, in the context of their lives? Secondly, why are we the right team to help them? Is it lived experience in that community, deep domain knowledge, a unique technical capability that they need? Or are you building what you find intellectually interesting rather than actually helping someone? If your team isn't representative of the people you're trying to help, you might not be the right people yet. And then the third question is, how can we address their needs better than anything else that exists today? And I don't mean ideology. Open source or federation are not solutions in themselves. They're characteristics of a solution. We need to be concretely meeting needs, not what you think their needs are or what you think they should be, but what you've learned they actually are from getting to know them deeply. What specific pain point are you solving that keeps people on WhatsApp today despite the surveillance risk, or on X despite the white supremacy, right? It's not about educating users, it's about educating ourselves about the users. What does open source or federation make possible that concretely makes their lives better today? Is it really better than Signal or email or whatever else they're using? And, here concepts like credible exit are hypothetical. They do matter a lot in the long term, but they're not going to drive adoption today if the immediate experience isn't better, right? What's making their lives better right now? And it might be that you don't have the answers today, and that's totally okay. Even then, there's so much that you can do. Maybe your role is to provide infrastructure, funding, technical support for communities building their own solutions, or just to promote the movement and spread the word. Maybe it's about supporting and contributing to other projects and forums and communities like FediForum. Maybe you need to continue to build your community or a team, building relationships and doing research until you do have the answers. But I don't think any social movement, any community, needs saviors riding in on a white horse. And the world particularly does not need more tech teams swooping in to change the world from the basis of their own assumptions, even if they do believe in open source or federation or all of these things that we know to be public goods. It needs more people willing to listen to the people who know and to support people who are already on the ground. So I invested in and supported a portfolio of 75 startups, all of which, as I said, were mission-driven, trying to make the world better in some key way. And it taught me a lot about projects and how they succeed or fail. And it turns out these questions for mission-driven open social web teams happen to be the same ones that most closely predicted whether one of those companies would live or die. If a team was trying to be the smartest people in the room and invent a solution without knowing, being of, and co-creating with the communities they were trying to help, they were not likely to succeed at what they were doing. The startups who were led by unwavering visionaries who thought they could invent something amazing because they were smart and clever and creative with better values, those were the startups that died fastest and hardest. If, on the other hand, they did the work to understand their communities, make sure they were building something that really served them, made the effort to grow to be representative of them, and changed their focus when they learned that their communities needed something different to what they had in mind, those teams were much, much, much more likely to succeed. And I do realize most of this room probably doesn't care about startups, but not to belabor the point, the same questions that predicted whether mission-driven startups would succeed apply to everyone building on the open social web. Who are you building for? Why are you the right team? How does your solution concretely serve their real human needs better than anything else? And I've learned this firsthand, right? I mentioned my two social networking projects, Elk and Known. Elk started with a concrete use case in higher education, then expanded to adjacent use cases in nonprofits, and then to businesses and startups. It became a thriving business for years. Investors came to us asking to put money in. Several governments used it as their national intranets. Known was designed for the indie web and had a community of people who are lovely people. They are all my friends today, but they liked and supported us because of a certain set of shared values that we were in line with. It was ideological. There was no concrete real-world use case, and Known honestly had real trouble building traction. The internal newsroom conversations I've had at the 19th, at ProPublica, about the open social web have been disappointing to someone like me who really cares about the space. They want to know why it's better for their bottom line than the incumbent social networks that they already know how to measure and use. The answer can't be ideological. There are real answers. People on the Fediverse are more likely to engage in and donate to journalism, for example. But stories about how the Fediverse is decentralized don't land for them. It doesn't speak to their needs. And it turns out that if you solve a community's needs deeply, you're valuable to them. And these communities have intersecting communities, which you can get to know too and be valuable to also. You're more likely to reach sustainability, whatever your model is, because you'll have communities that you're serving deeply, who you've become valuable to, and who want to support you. That might be through donations, or mutual aid, or revenue, or collaboration. They will support you. And we need the open social web to be sustainable. We need people to keep working on these problems. We need you to be able to work on this full time without burning out. These questions, they're not just good questions to ask, they are survival questions. The threats communities are facing aren't abstract, the needs are real, and we need the open social web to exist. So, as I was writing this talk, an entire apartment building in Chicago was raided. Adults were separated into trucks based on race, regardless of their citizenship status. Children were zip-tied to each other. And we are at the foothills of this. Every week it ratchets up. Every week there's something new. Every week there's a new restrictive social media policy or a news outlet disappears, removing our ability to accurately learn about what's happening around us. And look, I don't mean to scare you or to pressure you. I really don't, but you have so much power. The threats are real, but so is the community in this room. You have the skills, the values, and now hopefully a framework to build what's needed. Everyone here has the potential to be building the future. You're building platforms that provide an alternative to an authoritarian, extractive status quo, and every platform on the Fediverse has the potential to help build a more informed and equal global society. What I hope we'll all remember is that protocols and code are only valuable if they serve real communities with real needs. And today, there are communities facing real threats. The opportunity right now is not to build a better Twitter or to provide a nice place for people who care about Linux to chat. It's to build infrastructure that vulnerable people can actually use to organize, to communicate safely, and to build community. But we can only do that if we build with those communities from day one, not build for them based on our assumptions about what they need. So over the next 2 days, I really hope you'll use those 3 questions as one of your lenses as you navigate your discussions. Who is this really for? Are we really the right people to build it? And does it concretely serve their real needs better than what exists today? Because the stakes are real and there is real scope to help. Thank you very, very much for listening. I'm going to be hanging around FediForum. I'm excited for the conversations. If you want to yell at me, I understand. Here's where to find me. Thank you all.